Good morning, Professor Spooner. How are you?
Okay, good morning, Frank. Nice to see you again.
Pleasure.
I think that of course, the news today is full of the loss of John McCain, who was an extremely important character and has been an important character for a long time. And it's interesting that his contribution is being really recognized. But I think as far as globalization is concerned, the most important thing that has happened over the past week has to do with the Catholic Church. That really is quite amazing and also fascinating and really significant because it shows us, I think, how the relationship between religion and society is changing. And also, the way it's changing is that it has to do with the way the relationship between sex and marriage and everything that has to do with gender is also changing. And so putting these two things together really fits very this into what we have been expecting to happen in terms of globalization. Now, I'm not suggesting that we should have expected this sort of sin in the Catholic Church with globalization, but after all, everybody recognizes that this sort of thing has been going on for a long time. I was interested to see in the morning, this morning in the news, and I looked at newspapers in not only here but also in England, France, Germany, Russia, and Iran. The Catholic Church isn't getting much attention, but that may simply be because of John McCain, who is much more of a significant figure. But one of the things we're being told about the problem in the Catholic Church is that the Pope knew about this and there's evidence that he was told about it just after he became Pope in 2013. And he's not done anything about it. Now, it would be interesting to hear him explain personally what his reaction to it is and why he has done what he's done and hasn't done what he hasn't done. And that, of course, we will never know. However, as far as globalization is concerned, one of the interesting aspects of it is that we didn't used to talk about things like this, even if we knew about them. And now we're talking about them.
It's interesting because you always mention that the Catholic Church is one of those institutions that historically has been able to cross borders, cross cultures, cross societies, and when encountered with a crime such as this, as documented as this, I've read reactions from the Philippines, from Ireland, from the United States, of course, from Africa. I mean, this is something that every churchgoer on a Sunday feels and can begin to relate to. So in an odd way, it almost corroborates the place that the church holds as a global institution, and it's prompting outrage, I think, globally amongst Catholics, not to mention not only Catholics but people who are not Catholics. So it's an interesting little test as to see how the mechanism of the church still works as a global institution, but it seems to be working just fine in prompting outrage.
But it's interesting that the first thing that every religion historically has done is tell people what they should do in relation to sex and marriage.
Yep.
And the Catholic Church, even though it lost its monopoly in the 16th century, nevertheless has continued to be the largest communion of Christians up until the present. And I think it's larger than the Orthodox Church, though I don't have figures at the moment. It's the idea that priests are outside the general society is symbolized by their having nothing to do with sex and marriage.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it's philosophically an interesting idea, and it really is the continuation of the way religion evolved as an extension of culture at the beginning of urbanization, 7,000 years ago. Where the history is really, there is continuity in everything we do. But in our current situation in the modern world, the whole idea of what one can do sexually, and how one has children and how one brings them up and so on, everything that's institutionally mandated for these things is actually falling apart or weakening and becoming no longer a significant part of the way the society is organized. And presumably the church is going to have to accommodate that in some way.
Well, you raised an interesting point, actually. You just reminded me, of course, because if you take English history, for example, the struggle that the temporal authorities, the kings had against trying to prosecute actions vis-a-vis the church with the two separate court systems, the king's courts and the chancery courts, which were the church courts. The hangover that, for example, we've seen in Pennsylvania, and the outrage that seems to be being prompted, is a feeling that, how could these things have happened and still remained in the dark, being addressed and dealt with only by the church's legal system, whatever the heck that might be. And then now you have district attorneys and prosecutors who are beginning to move these things into the arena of the standard legal system. And I mean, this has long been settled law forever and ever, certainly in the past several generations, not to mention the last couple of hundred years. But I think what's begun to happen now is this idea of the separate identification of priests with collars and living alone in rectories and being celibate and being separate and apart, and in some respects still clinging to the governing of their behavior by a separate legal system. This is all finished now. It's finished.
Yeah.
And rightfully so. I mean, it shouldn't be. And yet I say this, and in the White House we have somebody who says that he can't be indicted because he's the president. So.
Well, we've been saying for some time that the most interesting thing about globalization is the change in the quality of human social life and what it means to be human socially. Mm-hmm. And this is an interesting example of that, because the relationship between biology and society and culture in the form of religion is really changing. How do we expect society to continue to change in the coming years, the rest of this century? Well, we know that it all has to do with the accelerating increase in the size of the numbers of people interacting with each other. So we can't all blame it all on Mark Zuckerberg, but he's certainly gaining from it. It's interesting that humans, all of us, seem to take advantage of this in some way. I mean, it's rare that you come across somebody who actually revolts against it and refuses to have anything to do with the new opportunities. So religion, and one of the most important things about religion, when I was a student of comparative religion at Oxford, I was told it's belonging.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
You a way to belong and get what you need socially out of life in ways that are not necessarily possible, and certainly not so easy, without religion.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been a very important factor in the strength of religion. And that, of course, is not the case anymore, because people simply aren't going to church because they're not interested in the rest of what you need to do to be able to belong.
Well, plus, excuse me, people have other avenues now to go down to belong in other places. All right. Some people identify and belong to political parties. Some people identify and belong to social groups. And that sense of belonging that maybe a millennium ago or even 300 years ago, that was really gained only through organized religion, I think now is replaceable in many other areas.
Well, I've been looking in Philadelphia, and especially West Philadelphia, for some sort of institution that I could see might be taking the place of the church, and I can't find anything. People aren't belonging to anything in a face-to-face way anymore.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, people used to meet in churches. Now, many fewer people go to church, and I can't find any social hubs
Mm-hmm.
where people go once a week. Whereas when I was growing up, admittedly in a different part of the world, my life was, as I grew up, I was beginning to be a participant in more and more social hubs, and that was a very important part of my development as an adult.
That's very interesting. So if you suppose that that social hub frequency, if you will, has now been removed and is absent, that's not a good thing.
No,
that's not a good thing at all.
Except that it may mean that it's taking such a completely different form, given that up until a couple of decades ago, it was face-to-face interaction was still the easiest form of interaction, because the new forms of remote interaction, well, literacy that's been with us for 5,000 years, but has only become something that everybody could use relatively recently. So there was very little in the way of other alternatives, other opportunities. But now, since the 1990s, there's so many other ways you can interact with people. And I think that's probably what the church is suffering from, that people don't need a religion to belong to anymore, which was the great social identity.
Right. Well, it certainly doesn't help with the kind of stories and media attention that the church is getting now. It's just turning people off. That's not a good thing to be happening at this exact time. And it's not just the church. All religions are suffering.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
It's just more obvious with the church because of its historical status.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that what is taking the place of religion is social awareness. The larger the number of people you interact with, without doing any studying, without being an academic or some sort of professional, you become aware of something much larger. And after all, that's something that religion did without society and added to society. And now you get it from your participation in everyday social life, and religion has not caught up.
I think you're actually right. No, I think you're correct. I think that's what's happened. Even an average person has that sense of being part of a larger whole now, and that need to go to church every Sunday and sit there with 150 other people and listen to a homily and go through a ritual. I mean, it's not as important compared to the feeling that person has on a day-to-day basis as being part of a larger whole. And that sense of belonging, I think, is there through TV, through social media, through many other avenues. It's completely different. I'll have to think about that. That's very interesting.
If we ever, as we expect to in the future, get to the point where we have a fully globalized society where it really doesn't matter where anybody is, because we can easily interact with anybody anywhere in the world, and possibly beyond that anyway, given, have you seen the news about the vice president's gospel of cyber exploration?
I looked at the headline and read the first paragraph, and I just rolled my eyes.
Well, that's all we needed.
Yeah. It's like, oh my goodness.
Being part of such a large social whole, I think, is going to determine what it really means to be human in a globalized world. And we're beginning to see it now. We're not sure how it's going to work linguistically, or even in any other form, and certainly not politically. We have no idea how it's going to work politically. An organization, as we've said before, is the biggest problem. However, we can see that it really is happening, and the example this week is the crisis in the church.
Well, it's something that certainly bears watching. We'll have to wait and see what its status is next week. Hopefully either more will be known, or it will be replaced by something else as newsworthy. Well, thank you very much, Professor. We'll look forward to next week's discussion. Thank you. All right.